My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
I'm Cloud Hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm Cloud Hired.
So, I'm Cloud Hired, guys!
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am Cloud Hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I am here to help you build your technology career. Maybe you have a goal of becoming a cloud architect, or an AWS solutions architect, or an Azure solutions architect, or a security architect, or an artificial intelligence architect, or an AI architect. Well, if you desire any of these careers, bring us your career questions so we can help you. Now, I'm more than happy to talk about other careers if you desire as well, careers which are thriving, careers which may be challenged in the future. But for the last 25 years, I've been an enterprise architect, a network architect, and every other kind of architect you can think of. And I've also spent about 2 decades helping people just like you get your first tech job, get promoted in tech. And I've got a laundry list of people that I've trained that work at Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, Zscaler, Palo Alto Networks, Netskope, and many other companies. So I want to help you too. So bring us any questions that you have. Before I get to answering your career questions, I want to tell you about 3 things that we have, and they're all free. 3 things that I wanted to tell you about. The first is completely free. It is tomorrow. We're going to run a webinar on how to become a security architect. Maybe you have the desire to become a cloud security architect or a security architect or a cybersecurity architect. Well, we're going to talk about how to do that tomorrow. We're going to hold a webinar at 1 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. We'll go over the security architect role. We'll talk about every skill you need. And we'll talk about the things you need to learn to get hired as a security architect, have the skills to be a great one, and be highly successful in your career. This webinar is free. We'll talk for about 30 minutes or so about the security architecture career, and then we'll answer any questions you may have. If you think you're ready and you want a little mini interview to see if you could pass an interview, I'll tell you right now if you're ready for the job or not. If you want me to evaluate your profile and see where you need to go to become a security architect from where you stand, I'm happy to do that, and it's all free and it's live on Zoom. So please sign up. I also want to tell you that in the description of this video, we've got career guides on how to become many different kinds of architects, like cloud architects, AI architects, enterprise architects. So they're all free, these ebooks, in the description of this video, and please enjoy them. And I also wanted to remind everybody that we just launched our brand new security architect and cloud security architect program. I am beyond excited about it. You know, I've been in all kinds of architecture roles, but what's always been nearest and dearest to my heart is networking, security, and of course the big picture enterprise architecture. I've done all the roles as architects and I love them all, but these are my favorites. So join us tomorrow and we'll talk about these great roles. So my team, has any questions come in? And if so, could you bring some in? And because I want to be able to help you. Tinman, hi, Mike. How do you balance developing tech skills with soft skills when training or learning to become an architect? For example, a security architect. How would you approach this? So, you know, Tin Man, you have to realize that These skills of both business skills and tech skills for an architect are really equally important. And I can't really tell you that you could just do the tech skills first or you could do the security skills first and be okay. Because what you really need to do is master both. Now, I can tell you from experience, Tin Man, either taking security engineers with 10 years of experience or taking people that were not engineers, that were a sales rep, for example, and training them to be a security architect. All in all, it takes me about the same period of time. And I'll extrapolate as to why that is. So let me talk about the things we do as a security architect, Tin Man, and then I'll talk about the types of skills and how they go together. So one of the things we do a lot of as security architects is we're going to develop and maintain an enterprise-wide security architecture. And we're going to design secure network infrastructure as well as secure systems. We're going to help create, update, modify security policies. We'll be creating and developing, say, incident response procedures. We'll be conducting risk assessments. We'll be evaluating various threat models that are out there and vulnerabilities that we know we have and comparing them against our risks and determining the risks and the impact of those risks to our organization. We'll be evaluating and recommending various security technologies and tools. For example, maybe we use this context-aware IAM system. Maybe we use a SIEM system from this organization to correlate our logs. Maybe you use a data loss prevention tool from another organization. Maybe we're using a certificate from somebody else. So, a lot of that is we're going to have to design that strategy for all of these tools, and we're going to have to evaluate and determine what tools are best for our business. We'll be developing business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and procedures. We'll be leading security awareness training programs. We'll be designing identity and access control systems, analyzing security trends and emerging threats, participating in the change management process, advising executive leadership on security strategies, managing a security budget, developing the strategy, overseeing the security aspect of a merger or acquisition, and maintain security documentation. Those are the main elements of our job. So, Tin Man, how do you balance it? First thing you have to understand is we are not SOC analysts. We are not security engineers. These are very important people in cybersecurity, but they are not ours, and we have a very different set of skills. Our role is in planning. And planning does not teach people how to do. So what are the kind of things we need to learn? Well, we need to learn network security. That is a skill. Now, we're not talking about the engineer, Tin Man, that's going to configure the access list. We're going to be looking at all in all, what is the, for example, all in all, what can we do on the network for this client? Could we rate limit certain packets, for example? Could we microsegment in VLANs? Can we further microsegment our VLANs with private VLANs where one server and another server can't talk to each other in the same subnet? Could we use a layer 2 access list? Could we use a layer 3 access list? Could we use quality of service to prioritize one type of traffic over another type of traffic? Could we use an access control list? Could we use a firewall? What kind of adapter firewalls are we using? What kind of intrusion detection, intrusion prevention? So that's an example, just network security. And we're going to have to balance that with, okay, what kind of application security do we need to help our organization figure out? Whether that be secure coding practices, and architects don't code, you don't need to know, but you need to know what those types of practices are, what kind of code analysis tools exist out there to analyze the code before it's being created. For example, what type of things should the application developers prevent? For example, things like providing they need input validation to make sure people can't do like an SQL injection attack when they create their applications. And then the architect would think about the organization's identity strategy. How do we determine who the people are? What levels of authentication? Do we use biometric authentication? Do we use a multi-factor authentication based upon a hash or a challenge or a one-time password or a token or something like that? And then what is our zero trust strategy? And are we context aware when people come in? Do we looking at other factors to determine what their privileges are? And then when it comes to right management, what can people do? What can they not do? And then keeping track of it. So, realistically speaking, and those are only a couple components of this, but we're going to be dealing with every element of it, from physical security. So the architect side, you've got to learn the principles of the technology. You have to learn how it gets applied together. But remember, we're not engineers. We're not going to configure that firewall. And quite frankly, you can configure firewall rules all day, but that won't teach you how to architect your demilitarized zone and what your demilitarized zone should look like and what your security strategy would look like. Teaching you how to configure a rule in a firewall teaches you how to configure a rule in a firewall. Teaching you how to design a strategy means learning the entire end-to-end picture, the business needs, the business goals, the business's workflows, and then figuring out where you can protect that organization. So I would make sure that I got training that does both. So Tin Man, we always teach both. And if I wasn't in a program like ours where you teach the business skills and the tech skills, what I would do is immediately start a master's in business administration to get the business skills and then learn the tech skills simultaneously, but not the how-to tech skills, the knowledge of how these technologies work and how they fit together and how you put them cohesively together into a strategy to really protect your organization while maximizing their business opportunities. So I kind of hope this works out and it's an answer that helps. Tin Man, please feel free to answer another question, and please join us in the How to Become a Security Architect webinar tomorrow. We're going to talk deeply about this. But the business skills are equally important, if not more important, than the tech skills for this job. Hi, Mike. What is my knowledge of threat modeling? You know, Dingleman, I know it as any other architect would. But threat modeling is by far not my expertise area in security. Now, granted, I've been in security forever. I actually have a tremendous background in physical security and all kinds of protection of every kind. And I have a tremendous background in network security. Now, I'm familiar with all the other securities, and I've used them in my enterprise architectures and security architectures. But those are the two areas where I have extreme experience. Threat modeling is not one of my biggest areas of knowledge, although I do know it enough to do what's necessary for most security architectures. But Dingleman, since you know me, and I know you're a great security architect, you understand that, security architecture is about building your team and creating the right team. So typically speaking, when I lead a major security architecture project, I may have an IAM architect with us. I may have some ethical hackers that are with us. I may have some other people to give some additional perspectives in addition to just me. And I definitely would use somebody on threat modeling from that perspective. Great question, Dingleman. Dingleman, also, would you even add AI security module to the security architect program? Dingleman, our security architect program is pretty comprehensive. And in some cases, there is AI in some of the things that we actually talk about it. Would we add more and more overall things related to AI security? As things change and as the world adapts, we'll always add more. But this program really covers the main elements of it. And if you really look from head to toe, and Dingleman, you may actually be in the program if you've actually had a chance to really look at it, we cover everything from the physical security that goes in, the network security, the application security, the identity strategies, zero trust frameworks, cryptography. So we dive deep into everything. And those controls that we're using are going to be the same kind of controls we're actually talking about with AI security. And so whether it be, keeping the AI systems from doing what you don't want to do, making sure the data, which is the source of truth, has its integrity. So in so many cases, yes, the answer is that. But yes, we have some. But Dingleman, as with all programs that we have, we keep adding to them. And I would assume that we'll have more about it at some point too. Definitely. Chris, we can go to the next one. What kind of roadmap do I recommend for a tier 2 SOC analyst with 4 years of experience? So Simon, I need to know where you want to go. And that's the biggest question. I can give you a roadmap to make you a security architect. I can give you a roadmap to become an enterprise architect. I could give you a roadmap to become a chief technology officer or a chief information officer. I could give you a roadmap to be a security engineer or like a defensive security engineer. But I really don't know what your actual goal is. And I don't want to guess what your goal is. So if you want to tell me what your goal is, I would be more than happy to give you a roadmap. But when it comes to a roadmap, I need your starting point and I need your end destination. And more importantly than where you've been, is really where you want to go. Because I know plenty of people, like R, for example, who's a student we trained. I can't use his real name because of the high nature of the security of where he worked, who went from a non-tech person immediately to a security architect, and that was his first job. I can tell you otherwise, I've got friends like Robert that I trained, and he spent about a year with us, but he went from a security engineer to a security architect. I can give you Delroy, for example, that never worked in tech before, who got his first job as a cloud security architect after we trained him. And I can give you other examples of people that have been engineers for a long time that we've also trained to be architects, but I don't know that you want to be an architect. So if you want to tell me what job you actually want to do, let me know. And otherwise, I'll wait to hear from you. Raj, is the architect's job considered done after providing the architectural solution? They move on and find a new project. So Viraj, there's basically going to be two places where we work. I'd say about half of us or 2/3 of us that work, let's say you work for an AWS, let's say you work for an Azure, a Google, a Palo Alto, a Cisco, a Fortinet, a Checkpoint, any other vendor like that. Your job will typically be to design an architecture for your client, to present it to them, to maybe lead a proof of concept where engineers do it, to sell it. And as soon as the customer signs on the dotted line, the company sends you to a new project and you design, present, and sell. So it's like a consulting role, very much like a sales engineer would do. Now, the next place is say, a security architecture. So, Viraj, I don't think most people understand how big the security architecture is, and they don't understand how big and how strategic the role for an architecture is. So, let's say you work as a post-sales architect, and now you work for a bank. Now, please understand that the bank's going to have business initiatives. Interest rates will determine what that bank actually does. The economic environment will determine what that bank actually does. New technologies and disruptive technologies that bank could use as a competitive advantage may impact in the way that bank does business. And all in all, the global economy will affect that business. So there's never a time, Viraj, where business is static. So let's say, and I can give you an example of when I was an architect working for a bank. And as soon as I was there, we had a new initiative. We were going to create this new AI-enabled training system that was going to process trades faster than anybody in the world. And this was in 2001. I was doing something like this. So when we're creating this AI trading system, obviously it had certain needs on the network. And obviously this thing had incredible needs on security. So it took me and a team of people a couple of months to design the network that was going to support this AI infrastructure. It took us several months to design the security for this AI infrastructure. And guess what? We put the AI trading system in. I designed the blueprints. Everything was done. The team of engineers built it. And as soon as I got off of that architectural project, the chief technology officer says, "Hi, Mike, guess what? I got a new architectural project for you. Now we need to prig this." And you know what happens 6 months or a year later after I was done the design of that architecture and building a business case on it? Some new technology came in that offered that business a competitive advantage. So you're going to design an architecture. You're going to do everything that's necessary. You'll be meeting with the stakeholders, learning about the business from the executives, optimizing business processes if and when appropriate, creating of your architectural strategies, which is going to baseline the organization's technology, see what they've done well. If it's security, for example, you'll be looking at vulnerability analysis and penetration testing type analysis and other type of reports that you might actually get. And then you'd be comparing that to what you want to do in the future. You'd lead a team to craft a strategy. You'd create some governance around that strategy. You'd create your statement of work. You'd sell it to the board. You get budgetary approval, and then poof, you're on the next project. And you're designing the architecture for the next thing, and the engineers are going to go and build it. Now, do you have to find a new project? No. There is so much work, Viraj, that as soon as you're done one, you're going to get another. And Viraj, in many cases, many architects, if they're not working on massive clients, are actually working to 2-3 clients at the same time. So you could be working at a company like Cisco or a Palo Alto or a Fortinet, and you could have 3 or 4 customers you're actually working on their architectures at the same time. And as soon as one buys, you could either be designing another architecture for that same customer, or you're going to another customer to create another architectural design. So you don't have to worry about finding work. There's always work. And for the 50% of the architects that are pre-sales, working for a cloud provider, a technology provider, a security provider, we bring in revenue to the business. So we're the first people to get hired and the last people to get laid off because we're bringing money into the business. And because we're not doing any of the hands-on things that AI could do, like code or write a Python script or write a Bash shell script, and everything we're doing is leadership, coordination, sales, stakeholder management, vendor management, we can't be replaced by AI. And because it takes so many business skills to do this and keep leading the things, we typically get paid well. So Viraj, don't worry. Yes, we will go on a new architecture on a new client or the new architecture for the same client. There's plenty of work and you're never done. No, so we don't have to find a new project. It'll find us. Great question. Chris, bring in the next one. Okay, Simon, you wanted to be a security architect. Excellent. So, Simon, you said you wanted a roadmap for a SOC analyst with 4 years of experience. I want to make it very clear to you that SOC analyst, security engineer, offensive security engineer, and a security architect are completely different positions. So you're going right now from something that's more of a hands-on thing, and now you're going to be moving to a strategy role, which means you're going to have to be taught these things. And for example, one of the things you'll have to do as an architect is learn to quantify risk, meaning identify the organization's assets, being able to figure out what these assets are worth, and being able to figure out the risk of compromise for these assets. And calculate that out. And then you'll have to be able to evaluate the different types of risk mitigation options you have. For example, do you transfer the risk to an insurance company? Do you mitigate the risk through a bunch of technical controls? Do you accept the risk? Or can you do partially mitigate the risk? Or do you just ignore the risk, which is, generally speaking, not a responsible thing to do? And then after you figure the risk, then you can start figuring out what type of budget you could actually create to solve that. Because if you've got $1 billion of risk, you're not going to spend $2 billion to protect that. But if you've got $1 billion of risk and you can manage that risk for maybe $100 million, it might be a cheap thing to do. So an organization will build a protection strategy, and it's going to be constantly like that. The next part of what we have to do as architects is truly understand the end-to-end strategy. Now, typically speaking, an engineer works on a firewall, or they work on an IDS IPS system, which is great, but that might be 2% of the entire environment. So to really be able to move into an architecture role, like the kind of people we train, the first thing you have to understand is the network and the data center. Why the network and the data center and the cloud? Because if you don't understand the technology in the network, data center, and the cloud, you're never going to be able to secure it. So this has nothing to do with your ability to write a bash shell script, for example. It's not going to teach you that. This has to do with your underlying knowledge. Where are the weaknesses in the system? For example, what would you have to do to do a hypervisor attack versus a virtual machine escape or a VLAN escape? How hard would these things be to do? And when you understand the way these attacks occur and how the underlying infrastructure actually works, then you're in a position. So you'll have to make sure someone teaches you network security or train with us. And of course, we'll cover all these tomorrow, but you have to understand network security, whether that be an ACL, a firewall, an IDS IPS system, whether it be of things related to a VPN concentrator, whether it be things like a packet filter, whether it be things like rate limiting, whether it be things like QoS, which you might be able to use to fend off, say, a worm, for example, by prioritizing the right traffic over worm traffic, whether it be a private VLAN, a layer 2 access list, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of keep this in the back of your mind. So that's typically what we're talking about of that. So understanding of those levels. So that would be network security. Then you'll have to be taught application security. Then you'll have to be taught identity and access management strategies. Then you'll have to be thinking about physical security and disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning and these types of things. And when you have that, Simon, then you'll have the technical side of your architecture skills. Now let's talk about the business skills. In your role as an architect, you have to understand that you are an advisor. You are not an engineer. You are not an analyst. You are a strategic advisor. So you're going to have to be advising the C-suite, advising that organization, and being able to be in a position where you can drive change in that organization. Now, that means you're going to need a good amount of business knowledge, because the architect's job is to optimize business. So like I said, if you're with us, we would train you in this. But if you're not, I typically say get an MBA to get the business goals. Now, a lot of what you'll be doing is communicating with the C-suite, getting buy-in, getting budget. And that means you need to be able to be what's called CXO relevant, have some strong leadership skills, and be able to communicate with the C-suite about the financial and business impact of your technology strategies. One of the things we do is manage stakeholders across our organization, get their input, get their buy-in, and get them to make sure their teams adopt what we do. So you're going to need a lot of vendor management and stakeholder management skills. You're going to have to learn how to sell. So you're going to have to develop sales skills. You're going to have to develop your executive communication skills. Now, you'll be presenting constantly, so you're going to have good presentation skills. And of course, we teach these. And you're going to have some executive presence to be able to come in and command the room. You're going to be doing a lot of negotiation in the role, so you're going to have to be there. And then those are your business skills, and you're going to combine that with good knowledge of security frameworks, good knowledge of cryptography, good knowledge of physical security, identity and access management, application security, like I said, data security, network security, risk management. And that's what we do. So it is the best job ever. I mean, I love this role, and I've been an architect forever, but you're going to need to get some training to go from there. But the good news is, any of you can be an architect. I've got examples of people like Delroy Bath that was working on an ambulance as an emergency medical technician a year later after our training as a cloud security architect. But where I also have taken people with 10 years of engineering, and it takes me about a year to turn them into an architect. Engineering is a wonderful job. Engineers are very important. I love engineers. But engineering and architecture is about the same as speaking English and Greek. Most of the words are very different. And for the answer I gave you, that was actually related to becoming a security architect or a cloud security architect. And why am I using the terms interchangeably? Because in today's world, 98% of businesses are multi-cloud. And what does that mean? It means most enterprises have 1 or 2 data centers and 2 or 3 cloud providers. So if you don't know the data center and the cloud, there's really no place for you to work in cloud computing or security architecture. So yes, of course, there's that. Now, was there another side of this question? Oh, no. There you go. Chris, bring in the next one. Zimcan IT, it's so good to see you. Hi, Mike. What a great show. What time is the How to Become a Security Architect webinar, please? It's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Zim, I look forward to seeing you there. We enjoyed working with you on your journey to become a cloud engineer. I know you're doing great as a cloud engineer right now, and I can't wait to see you in that. It's always good to see you, Zim. So it'll be at 1 p.m. and you can sign up to get the recording even if you can't make it live. So just as long as you register, if for some reason you can't make it, Zim, the recording will be sent to you. And anybody that signs up. Raj, is the architect's responsibility conditional done after providing the architectural solution? Then they have to move on to a new project or find a new project? Generally speaking, as soon as we're done the architecture, we move on to a new architecture. But we don't have to find a new project. So either it's going to be like you work in an environment. So, I was a principal architect at Riverstone. I was an architect at Cisco. I have lots of places where basically I went in there and I was an architect. So let's say a large global bank was my client, and it was when I was at Cisco. First client I had was one of the biggest banks in the world. And they said, Mike, you need to design an enterprise-wide voice architecture for this client. And I said, okay. And you know what happened? The second I was done that enterprise-wide voice architecture for that client, Mike, I got to tell you, I've got this huge architecture that's going to be over $1 billion with one of the world's global retailers. Okay, so that's where I did my next architecture. Mike, do you know there's a healthcare system in the UK that really needs to speak to a strategy consultant that knows architecture and healthcare? Could you go talk to them? So the company, if you work for a company like that, they're going to send you on client and client. It's going to be the greatest thing. You're never going to get bored. Now, the alternative is you work at the end client. And at the end client, what's going to happen is every year they're going to have a technology budget, they're going to have business plans, and they're going to have a business strategy. And as the business plans and business strategy change, so must the organization's technology. So you work in an organization and you're an architect. You're the chief technology officer, chief information officer say to you as the architect, look, we're trying to do this. We would like to increase, for example, the revenue off of our main website. We believe that some kind of recommendation engine that could talk to the person while they're there could recommend things based upon the client's history that they might be more inclined to like, so they might spend more money on the website. So that could be the organization's goal. And let's say you're an architect and you design that solution, or you lead that organization. As soon as you're done that, just because you did a new website, that doesn't mean that there's not a supply chain thing that doesn't need to be changed, or a CRM system that doesn't need to be changed, or a security thing that doesn't need to be changed. There's always change. Interest rates go down. Oh, companies invest in money, brand new architecture. Interest rates go up. Now you got to create some automation strategy to make the company more efficient with less resources. There is never a time where there's no work to do as an architect for the most part, and it will find you. See, architecture is about optimizing business. Engineering is about building the tech, and I want to really briefly talk about the difference. No matter how little money you have or a business has, if there's an investment they can make to enhance their business, they're going to make it. By comparison, the engineering and the post-sales and the marketing, all this stuff the company considers an expense. So that's the risk when you're in a position that's considered to be an expense. When you're in a position that's designed to be revenue producing or optimizing the business, you're the safest after your project is done. So I don't think you ever have to worry about job security as an architect. Good architects out there, literally could get 20 calls a day or requests for interviews. Architects that are out there that are known to be good to build a brand, because there's such a demand for architects, but we can't hire them. Because as soon as we interview someone for an architect, it becomes clear they don't know anything about architecture. They may know engineering, which is great. They may know software development, which is great. But when we need an architect, we're looking for a strategist that can design a system that includes optimizing the organization's people, processes, and technology, not drawing a pretty tech picture or building it. So no, you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, project. Which is why it never gets boring. Zimcan IT. As an aspiring cloud security architect, is it necessary to learn the various firewall providers, Fortinet, Palo Alto, etc.? So let's talk about the difference between the architect version of this and the engineering version of this. So if I have a security engineer, let's say they're going to be configuring a Palo Alto firewall, a Fortinet firewall, and they need to know how to configure it. That's going to be critical for the engineers, how to do it, and to a degree, how that firewall works. Now, Zimcan IT, to the architect, knowing how to configure it is meaningless to us, because our decisions are going to be based on something else. Our decisions are going to be based, how does firewall 1 work versus firewall 2? What are firewall 1's features versus firewall 2 features? Do the features of firewall 1 or firewall 2 better align with our organization's business strategy? What is the maximum kind of throughput that I can get on each one of these devices if we turn on all the features we need? And if so, how many of these devices do we need to have? What is the best practice for designing these in a strategy that's going to provide high availability? How do you want these systems to fail if and when they do fail? Are they going to fail open, or are we going to set them up to fail closed? Should we have a single layer of firewalls, or should we have 2 layers of firewalls? Now, if we use 2 layers of firewall, should we use an IDS IPS system in our architecture? Even though it's integrated in so. And if so, what are we going to do? How are we going to take the logs out of our firewalls, IDS systems, IPS systems, and where are we going to send them? Are we going to send it to a syslog server, or are we going to send it to a SIEM system that can use AI to mine through the logs? So Zim, if that makes any sense, the architect does need to know these firewalls. They need to know what the firewall strengths are, what the firewall's weaknesses are, how each of these firewalls can fit into your overall strategy, where one vendor's firewalls have their strategic advantages and where another vendor's firewalls have their strategic advantages. Could you combine them together? Would they mitigate each other, or would they support each other? Because if their algorithms are similar, they might not that might be better to use two different kinds of firewalls from two other vendors, for example. So that's much more of what we need to know. So if you can think of it, the architect needs to know the planning, and they need to know the questions, where the engineer is all more about how to do it and the deep technical nitty-gritty. So I know security architects that would have no idea how to configure a firewall, no idea how to configure an access list on a router, no idea how to touch any part of the technology, but they know physical security, and they know how to design it, and they understand how to coordinate a really good network security, and they understand application security, and that's the feature. That's what makes it good. So we're going to be so big, so large scale. We need to think of the entire big picture, not how to, but the why. That's the big thing for our decision, and that's why people don't get hired, Zim. Because here we are, we're big, we're holistic, we're looking at strategy, and then people try to learn how to build one part of it. And that's one part of the other 1,000 parts. And that's the difference between engineering and architecture. What a great question, ZimCam IT. I hope to see you in our free architect webinar tomorrow. ZimCam IT. Currently reading the CCSP study guide by Mike Chappell. Great. It's very abstract. Would I say the pieces come together while en route to being a security act, doing more ISC2 certs? Honestly, no. So, Zim, I'd like you to also, we have a CCSP bootcamp that's completely free on this channel. We also have a CISM bootcamp that's completely free on this channel. I'll let Chris provide it here. But here's the thing in these certifications, Zim. The certifications will give you an overall perspective, but they don't tie the pieces together. They're kind of in their own independent thing. So here's some of the stuff you can do on the application side. Here's some of the stuff you can do on the network side. Here's some of the stuff you can do on the physical side. Here's some of the stuff you can do. And they tell you all that stuff, but there's no architecture, which is the putting the pieces together. I'll tell you, of all the certifications I've seen in security, the one that comes closest is the CISSP. And that's why in every program we have, there's CISSP training. But to be fair, our security architect program covers the CISSP. It does cover the CISM, and it does cover the CCSP. But Zim, I'd say that's 30% of it. You know, we also have to go into zero trust architectures and NIST architectures and cloud security and data center security and other kinds of network security that we need to go much deeper in that. And of course, Zim, we have to teach people how to tie the pieces together, which is the difference between an architect and an expert on individual modules. It's that strategy to put it together. But Mike Chappell is great. He writes some fantastic books, and I highly recommend them for the CISSP, for the CISM, and it will come together the more and more you review it. But realistically speaking, but still the lacking piece of any of these certifications is how do you put the pieces and parts together? What are those business needs, which are not going to be in here? How do you find the business things? How do you deal with the people? How do you create a new security program, get people to adopt it, develop your training involvements, testing your business continuity, disaster recovery plans? That's all the stuff. That's the architecture piece that ties it together. They do a good job in these certifications. Thankfully, they're not like cloud certifications where you can get 10 of them and still not know what is cloud computing. But to be fair, they're still going to be light compared to what you need to know. But they will come together the more and more you work with it. And if we train you in this, it's going to be very simple to you, and I'm sure you're going to do great. Because I know how smart you are, and I know how fast you learn. Not sure if you can agree. AI can help with coding, but it cannot replace engineers, especially good ones. You use AI coding as well, but far from replacing. So, Mr. Dominic, let's talk about two things. I believe that AI will not replace the best engineers. But I'm going to tell you right now, Google is writing 25% of their code with AI. Facebook and other companies have said we're going to be laying off our bottom tier of engineers. And here's the reality. From what I've seen, AI does a better job than the bottom 30 to 40% of engineers. They're the first ones to go. I truly believe long-term that the best software engineers will still be there. But the key is we're new to generative AI. We're only talking 2 years. And in 2 years, Google's writing 25% of its code. And imagine where we are 3, 4, or 5 years. I bet you 80% of their code comes there. In fact, the Microsoft CEO said that SaaS is dead because organizations are just going to use AI to write their own applications so they won't need SaaS providers. And Microsoft is a huge SaaS provider. So here's the good news. The engineers that will stay, the best of the best who can't be replaced, they're going to get paid better and better and better. And they're going to have to stand alone and above the crowd. But I can show you a Terraform script, a Python script, or any of these other things that are as good as somebody that's not very good. But that's where we're at now. Imagine where we are later. The volume of work will increase, the quantity of work will increase, and the best of the best we always, always need. But I'm not sure how many thousands of people you've interviewed, but I can tell you in 1,000 interviews, I can find some people that can do a really great job. The best of the best, we all need them. The network engineer, that's where the CCIE is their intro level, and they keep getting better. Boy, do we need them, and we'll always need them. That incredible ethical hacker that can break into the system through a combination of social engineering and incredible technical skills, those kinds of people aren't replaceable. They're going to do the best, and we will need them. But we need the best of the best. Understand tech can do better than a lot of others. Dingelman, also you listen to an architect that worked for the WTC for the Fuji Bank until the 2001. He said it really set them back. How would disaster recovery planning help for something like this? So, Dingelman, it all depends what was realistically going on. Generally speaking, if the organization had a good disaster recovery environment, they would have replicated some version of their systems and all of their data to someplace else that was fairly far away. And if it was fairly far away, realistically speaking, wouldn't have been a big deal. They could have opened their system. So Dingelman, just imagine right now, let's assume, and there's two parts of it. There's the disaster recovery planning for the tech and the business continuity planning. And I have no knowledge of realistically speaking what went on in this actual disaster. But for the technology systems, that we could have our entire systems in Fiji, if we really wanted to, for an example, and we could have them in a data center. Now, I could easily, right now, no big deal, not even think about it, create virtual machine images of all the servers that I have and store my data in a cloud provider. And in an environment like that, infrastructure as code, script, poof, these systems are up and running. But in 2001, we didn't use as many cloud providers. So what did we do instead? In 2001, we built offsite data centers. We put storage in there. We put compute. And we had the ability to get a good percentage of our organization systems up and operational fairly quickly. They were called cold data centers. We ran dark fiber under the cable or got a high-speed network connection to them. We had some compute servers in there to power all the main systems, any systems that mattered. We had our storage. We always stored backups there. And if we needed, we could have taken it. So yeah, disaster recovery planning can help a lot. Now, I don't exactly know what happened to Fiji Bank. So I can't give you a lot of information about that particular thing, but business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning can solve a lot of problems. Let's think, I'll leave it at that without going into some pretty horribly bad historical problems that have come on recently. Don't be shy. If you've got some career questions, ask them. We want to help you get to your goal. Right. Hi, I want to know if there are, possible sites, ways to apply to remote freelance cloud jobs from anywhere in the world. You have 2 years in DevOps and would like to remote from Central Asia. The majority of resources you find require work from the US. So there are a tremendous number of jobs all over the world. Tremendous number of jobs. Now, I probably wouldn't look for freelance jobs if I was looking for a full-time job. I would look for a full-time job. So I would ask you this question. What are you doing to create an audience to show people what you're good at? What can you tell me to show me that you've got such expertise in DevOps that I need to come to you? I'll tell you in a minute why I'm saying this. That's what I need to know. There are plenty of organizations you could work for. There are great jobs in Singapore, in Korea, and in other parts of Central and other parts of Asia. For example, there are many good jobs in places like Dubai or UAE or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or other places, and people go and work at them all the time. There are also expatriate opportunities in Asia Pacific places like Australia, New Zealand, as well as parts of Europe. So there's always going to be opportunity for you to work. Now, every company out there has it. So the question is really, what is your skill? What is it really? And what is it you can do to really help someone? That would be where I would focus if I was you. Or if I was going to do something like DevOps engineering. And DevOps engineering is honestly one of the things you can do from anywhere in the world. One of the reasons I always worried about engineering careers, and I typically don't train engineers, is not because I don't love them, but because in many cases, the companies hire an architect in America to actually design it, and then they hire engineers in India or Ukraine or other parts of the world to actually be able to build it. And that's, so, there's always opportunity because it doesn't matter where you write your code. If you're writing a Python script, it doesn't matter if you're in Cambodia, Cameroon, Chicago, the Cayman Islands, or California. It really doesn't matter. But you got to go out there. You got to go out there and build your name. You're going to go out there to reach out to employers. What's your resume look like? What's your LinkedIn profile? And what are you doing to show about you? Because you will get plenty of, I know people that are making $100, $200 an hour living in around where you are. And they're doing it because they're so good at remote work. And there's so much work that actually needs. So be able to go out there and figure out what you're good at. What is it your unique strengths? What is it that you really want to do that employers are screaming for that they can't actually find skills? That's what you do. And I'll tell you, for my life, I always found it fun to learn obscure things. So I actually built my career initially. My first principal architect role was in something called IP Multicast. There were about 10 people in the world that understood it at the time. I understood there was going to be demand for it for video, and I decided I was going to learn about multicast. I lived it, eat it, breathed it, slept it. Now, within 2 years from the time I started tech, I was a principal architect consulting all over the world for it. And here was the best news. No one else knew it. And because no one else knew it, Mike, I know you're in New Jersey today working from home, but can you be in Palm Beach tomorrow? And after Palm Beach, can you go to Miami? Mike, you're in Miami. Can you go to Sao Paulo? While you're there, can you go over there? Can you go back to England? And while you're in England, can you stop in Dubai? While you're in Dubai, can you stop in Riyadh? On the way home from Riyadh, could you go to Sydney? And that was kind of what my life was like because I picked something that no one else knew. Later in my life, I consulted on BGP. Then I was one of the first few experts out there in security and big, large-scale global networking, and that's what I've always done. So go out there and find that, and you'll be awesome. And you know what? If you ever want to come on one of our free webinars and you want to talk, I'm happy to answer any career questions I have for you and really talk about you, and I will do anything I can to help you. And please come, and hope to see more of you soon. If anybody's got some questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, Chris and I've got a lot of things to do today. We'll get back to work. But if there's an opportunity to help, I know our team really wants to. So please don't be shy and ask your questions. Hi, you just joined. You need some advice. You're trying to land a role in cloud security. Offensive security, something hands-on. Okay. You did some cybersecurity certifications and you're trying to study the AZ-500. So, okay, you want to do something called offensive security. So what is your knowledge of hacking? Because offensive security is really hacking. So the first thing that I would do if I wanted to get involved in hacking is I would get myself a good server. and or get some training. But if you're not going to get some training, I would get myself a good server. Now, the good news, Kamoy, is you can buy for about $400 from Amazon right now a server, and it'll have two 12-core CPUs in it, like a Xeon E5 2670 something V3, 128 gigs of RAM, and an SSD drive. And on this server, here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to create a couple of virtual machines. I want you to create a Kali Linux virtual machine, and I want you to start learning how to use the Kali Linux tools and learn how to hack into those other virtual machines that you have. So Kali Linux will have a lot of hacking tools. I want you to learn them and learn them well. And that will give you a start. Now, because this is going to be a very hands-on role, and you also have to understand that offensive security is also people-oriented. Now, the biggest weakness in many systems is not their technology. So with offensive security, you're going to have to learn how to hack people. Now, this is going to be called social engineering. There was a book called The Art of Deception by Kevin Mitnick. I was forced to read it like 20 years ago when I started my security architecture career, because it was he was a famous hacker, and they wanted the architects to understand the minds of the hackers and the way they moved into things, and that would be something good. But you really want to learn social engineering. You're going to really have to polish up your communication skills. You're going to have to polish up your body language reading. You're going to have to learn how to sell and learn how to convince people to do things they don't want to do or wouldn't ordinarily do. Because part of the offensive security engineer is convincing people, give me your password, or let me in, or push the button and let me in the elevator for me. So you're going to have to learn how to do that. And even though this is a hands-on role, there's going to be that. I would then get hands-on and start learning various systems and learning their weaknesses if I was going to be an engineer. So I might build an Active Directory server on a virtual machine on that server. I would build myself some virtual machines. I would build myself some containers, and I would play with it. I'd start learning and playing with a hypervisor, for example, versus the containers, and figuring out the challenge of what you would do with a virtual machine escape versus, say, a container escape. But for an engineer, it's hands-on. But it's not hands-on because I've done a lot of stuff. You have to understand the what you're doing and the why. Now, for the offensive security, there's actually two good certifications out there. And there's one that's loved by people in the field, and there's one that's loved by managers. Now, the OSCP is a certification that's typically loved by engineers in penetration testing, and the CEH Master is one that's loved by managers. So I care about the one that's loved by managers, but between the two of them, you'll also learn a fair amount of penetration testing. Plus, with the CEH Master, you actually have to prove in front of someone that you can break into something. So that's going to give you some competency. So if you get that kind of hands-on experience with Kali Linux, and then you start, if you have that server and maybe you build a cloud and you hack into the cloud, so you can see how you could hack into a cloud. And on that same server, you've got your Kali Linux thing and you hack into some virtual machines. And then on that same server, you have create an Active Directory server. And then you can play with various things and hands-on. You can do that. And then, when you're done that, you can take that same server, you could erase it, and you could get yourself an EVE-NG simulator. And on that EVE-NG simulator, you can actually get the software for various firewalls like Palo Alto firewalls, Fortinet firewalls, Cisco firewalls, and you can put virtual machines on that type of system and learn how to hack into that system through the firewalls and play with it. So that's going to give you a lot of hands-on things. Now, Kamaya, I'm going to tell you, it's probably easier to train you to be a security architect. It would probably take less time and you would earn more. But a lot of people love that tech. And if you love the tech, the offensive security engineer is a good one. And that's how I'd go about doing it. Zemcan IT. Is there an architecture certificate that's not vendor specific? Or after acquiring the AZ305, should you pursue an AWS equivalent exam, intending to be a multi-cloud architect? Well, Zemcan IT, I'm going to tell you right now that there is 0 architectures in the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, Azure Solutions Architect Expert, and Google Professional Cloud Architect. All of these certifications are systems administration. What they do is they teach you a name of a service. Now, they don't tell you what that service actually is, and then they teach you how to configure it. And when it actually comes to that, you've got a problem. Now, when it comes to multi-cloud architectures, there's two things we have to understand, Zim. First, everybody's doing it. And the more certifications we take from the vendors, the harder multi-cloud architecture is going to be. The secret to multi-cloud architecture is the following. Use open standards and open tools. What does that mean? It means for routing protocols, we use BGP because it works everywhere, for example. It means we're using VLANs, VLAN tagging, VLAN trunking, the same things because they work everywhere. It means when we go to the cloud, we get rid of that AWS DynamoDB, that Amazon Aurora, that cloud, Google Cloud Bigtable. We don't use any of it. We use MongoDB, Apache Cassandra, Oracle, MySQL, something that we put in all clouds. We don't use things like SQS, and then we use things like Apache Kafka in all clouds. We don't use things like AWS WAF because that doesn't have anywhere near the security capabilities of Palo Alto firewall, especially with behavioral security analysis. But we don't use a provider's anything. We put maybe Palo Alto or Fortinet or Cisco in all three firewalls. So at the end of the day, get one cloud provider cloud architect certification that has nothing to do with architecture. And why are you doing this, Zim? The only reason you're really doing it is because it's going to help you get an interview, and you realize that everything on that architecture exam for the most part is just names you can't even use with your clients. Because your client wants to know that you're going to move their 10,000 virtual machines. They don't care what EC2 is. They do care that you're going to deal with their 2 petabytes of object storage, but they don't want to be called it's Amazon Simple Storage. They want to know that it's object storage. They want to know what they're dealing with. So there is that. So is there an architecture certification that is non-proprietary? Well, I'll tell you, my favorite of all of them is actually made by Cisco, and it's the Cisco Certified Design Expert, and that is pretty much mostly a non-Cisco exam, even though it's run by Cisco. And it is a true architectural exam in that they will give you an architectural scenario and a business problem and a challenge, and you'll have to create the architecture, you'll have to design it, and then you'll have to present it back to a team of people, and they'll interrogate you to see if your answers are good enough. You'll have to justify your architecture, like the real job. So the CCDE, which I'm not recommending them because it's often a bit too technical, and it's going to cost $20,000, $30,000 to prepare for, and it's not going to do much for you, would be a very good overall end-to-end architecture certification. Now, the one that I typically teach my clients that I recommend is the TOGAF 10. And TOGAF is an enterprise architecture framework that really focuses on digital transformation. So instead of being like an AWS well-architected framework that tells everybody how to do the same thing the same way every single time, regardless of what their clients' needs are, the TOGAF enterprise architecture framework is more about determining the client's goals and understanding the way the business operates and being able to optimize the way the business operates and align people, processes, and technologies to make sure organizations get a return on investment from their investments in technology. So TOGAF typically looks very good. And honestly, when I train architects, a lot of times I just give them the CISSP certification too, and I train them in at least our programs. And the reason I do that is this. Security is so big right now. And it is just so big that having additional security knowledge gets you a lot more calls. And I've noticed that as soon as I put a CISSP on somebody's business cards and resume, they get a lot more. So I typically teach you the Azure Solutions Architect Expert or the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the TOGAF 10, and the CISSP. That seems to give my students a competitive advantage on getting interviews. And then it's what we teach them that actually gets them hired. Zimken IT. Wow, the job of an architect is so holistic. Exactly. Thank you for answering your questions. We are more than happy to. So happy to help. Mary. Donald Iron Duck, you're working as a lead software developer, but looking to switch to business solutions architecture. You're focusing on business acumen, product knowledge, and skill sets. Any other items you should focus on? So Donald, the last thing you should focus on is product knowledge. And so let's talk about overall solutions architecture. So when you say business solutions architecture, I think you're referring to overall enterprise architecture or big architectural pictures. or anything related to optimizing business, like a cloud architect or a solutions architect. The first thing you have to realize is what we do has very little to deal with software and almost nothing to do with software development, but there's going to be a lot of things that you learn. So for example, and the reason I say you can't count on software, if I asked you, how would you design the IP addressing scheme for an organization that has 200,000 devices, what would it look like? If I asked you, how would you design your demilitarized zone for a web application for a bank where security is of ultimate criticality? If I were to ask you something fairly similar, could you map out the organization's value streams and business architecture? And why would you need to map that out prior to creating a new technology blueprint? Could you answer these things? If I were to ask you how you could load share across 2 direct connections without getting out of order packets, you probably wouldn't know. If I would talk about what would it take to create an end-to-end security strategy, you probably wouldn't know. If I wanted to talk to a software developer about whether I should use an ARM versus a traditional processor, what are the trade-offs, would you know? So when we're dealing with the developer, we're dealing with an engineer. When we're dealing with an architect, we're dealing with a strategy planner. What is it that you're dealing with? Not software, but network architecture and data center architecture. So say you're dealing with a cloud and you're a cloud architect, we're not looking at the code. We're not writing the code. We're going to be looking at what kind of compute options we have. When and where should we put it on a virtual machine? When and where should we put it in a bare metal server? When and where should we put it in our data center? When and where should we put it on a container, run it as a function as a service, or use application virtualization? Now, each one of those options has its strengths and its weaknesses, and that's going to limit what we can get out of that application and its compute. Where do we store our data? What are the limitations with cloud storage? For example, block storage is very slow. I can get 19 million IOPS on a single RAID card in my data center, but when it comes to the cloud, I can't get better than 250,000 IOPS. What are the implications of that? What are the implications of the latency between my users and the cloud provider? So these are the kind of things that we need to think about, and most of it is not software. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite you into our How to Become an Architect webinar. Maybe attend next week's How to Become a Cloud Architect, and maybe download the How to Become a Cloud Architect career guide that's in the description of this video. And it will show you what those other elements are. And I'll give you an example of what some of them are now. But I want you to, from the tech side, and then I'll give you the answers on a business side. But I don't want you to think by any stretch of the imagination that the things that one does as a software developer are really related very much to actually cloud architecture. And I can tell you this because I've retrained a lot of software developers, and I can tell you where it comes from. So let's talk about some of the skills that you would need to know from a tech skill perspective. You would need to know network design skills. What kind of wide area network technology would you choose, like a private line versus an IPsec tunnel versus a SASE WAN versus a software defined WAN? You know, how do you design your compute? Where does it go? Knowledge about your storage area networks, knowledge about your big data, how your big data design. So artificial intelligence. So those are the things that go into it. The good news is you've got a lot of background, and take that background with you. Take every lesson that you learn, fill in that tech, fill in the business, and you will have a career you can't even imagine. And I welcome you to this career because I got to tell you, I did spend a little bit of time as an engineer. And that's why I love and respect engineers so much for all the work they've done. But I have to tell you, this job is a vacation. So I welcome you to this career. Fellow Shockey, assume someone was technically incompetent, would a successful investor make a good cloud architect? So, fellow Shockey, it depends what you mean as a successful investor. Here's what I consider to be a successful investor. A successful investor is someone that can evaluate various businesses, understand the various business models, understand the client's business architectures, understand what that company does, its value streams, what it does better than other companies, understand how that company goes to market, and understand how that company could sell its products, will sell its products, and how a return on investment. That level of person is doing architecture work, exactly architecture work. As that's what I would, and it's almost the same role. So, fellow Shockey, let me talk about the roles of planning roles versus the roles of doing roles. Planning roles are a physician. Planning roles are an attorney. Planning roles are an architect. And what makes a good physician, for example, a patient comes in and they have a problem, a really good physician is the one that can find the cause of the problem. What goes into finding the cause of the problem? The level of communication skills that physician has, the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to pull the right answers out of the person and guide the person into giving them the information they need. Now, that's combined with the person's knowledge of the individual systems in the body, their analytical skills to be able to say, if I'm hearing all of this, here's the problem that I'm dealing with, here's my diagnosis, and here's my plan. Now, when we're dealing with an architect, the architect's going to meet with that client. They're going to have to find where that business wants to go. They're going to have to speak to the executives. They're going to have to learn that business's challenges, that business's pain points. And from there, they can begin to think about how they want the business to operate in the future, how they could create strategies for that business, and how they could build a plan. Now, that's the same thing a successful investor does. An investor that's going to invest in a company like a venture capitalist is going to analyze that company. They're going to learn that company's needs. They're going to learn what that company does well. They're going to learn the company's competitors. They're going to value that company's strategic ability, the company's ability to execute its people that it has. And if it feels good about it, it's going to make an investment. And if an architect, if you evaluated your client's business correctly, and you've understood their business architecture, their business value streams, their competitive environment, understand their business and technical challenges, you're in the position to recommend the correct strategy. So these roles are very similar. Now, if you had asked me a completely different question of how, say, cloud engineering is related to cloud architecture, I'd say not a lot. I'd say cloud engineering is wonderful, but the people that build the cloud typically don't design the cloud because they're completely different jobs. But generally speaking, a good investor, they can invest and invest and invest and invest and invest, be in good shape. Chris, we can go to the next one. How would you recommend removing the brand of a software engineer to be considered a viable choice for a cloud architect role? Falashaki, that's a really great question. And, I actually feel bad about saying this because I love engineers so much. But when a company wants to hire an architect, they're not looking for a techie. In fact, I've been through probably 1,000 architectural interviews. I've done about 6,000 interviews in my life. But I'd say there were between 500 and 1,000 of them where we interviewed someone that was so technically smart, but they didn't have good presentation skills. They couldn't sell. They couldn't communicate well. And here's what the team would say on the interview. Why do these techies keep coming for architect jobs? We want architects. Don't they know we don't want an engineer? And that was pretty sad to me because a lot of engineers have a lot of good technical skills. Now, I can tell you, even when I started my engineering role, it held me back. In fact, I was very technical in my first technical architect job, and that held me back. So, Falashaka, let me tell you a little story about what I did. So, the first thing that I did is got my first job as a senior engineer, senior network engineer. About 3 months later, I was the lead architect. A couple of months after that, I was working on Wall Street as a senior network engineer. And about a year after that, I was a principal architect. But it was a technical architect role. And while I was consulting on deep technology and IP multicast, it was fairly tech. Now, I left there. I went to Cisco. And as soon as I got to Cisco, I saw all these beautiful, big, exciting executive architect roles. And I went, I want one of these. And I had an opportunity to speak with my manager, and he gave me a lot of things to do. And he sent me to leadership skills class, executive presence training, sent me to a leadership coach, helped me pay for my MBA. So Falashaki, I did a few things. One is I went to business school. After business school, I took all this executive training. When I went to work, I got rid of these kind of shirts because this is the way I like to dress. And I bought a bunch of Armani and Canali suits. And every day I showed up to work in a suit and I made sure my shoes were polished. Every time somebody asked me a very technical question, I said, that's a really good point. Let's look at the impact of this. This could affect this, this, and this. So why don't we go find one of the subject matter experts? And I'd speak to the subject matter expert and I would document the meeting and I'd write a thank you note to the subject matter expert and show it to my management and team because I'd copy them along the way. And my management, whoa, Mike's a really good leader. Mike's not doing this hands-on work. Mike's getting others look at the things, and all of a sudden my work output tripled. And I started to walk like an executive. I started to talk like an executive. Soon I finished my MBA. And as soon as I finished my MBA and had some of my executive codes, poof, I was in a major executive architect role. And no one remembered that I used to be a CCIE or techie. And that's ultimately what I had to do. And ultimately, when I got to that role, I actually was asked to remove the CCIE and the CISSP and all these other fancy things from my business cards. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, did. And then my career even went further. So it's about talking about business. It's about showing business. It's about showing your executive skills. It's about showing your leadership skills. And when others want to talk about the technology and they get excited about the technology, you show the technology is just another tool. And whether it's a phone, whether it's an ice machine, whether it's a screwdriver or an AI tool, if the tool gets your client to their ultimate goals, that's the right tool for them. So that's what I had to do. How would I recommend a cloud architect goes about obtaining financial knowledge? Well, Cloud Folosaki, there's honestly two ways. Any student that gets trained with us gets trained in financial knowledge and business acumen because they won't be an architect without it. And that's typically why we have to retrain most of our competition students. They get all these training, they go to all these programs, they learn every skill that has nothing to do with architecture, like Python, DevOps, SysOps, and Linux. And then they go on their first architecture interview and someone says to them, you've got it. The organization has a 7% weighted average cost of capital. Could you tell me how you would use that information to build a private cloud or use a public cloud? Could you give me some information on that? And the person doesn't even know what you're talking about. Or they don't have the business knowledge to even know where to begin to help an organization get to their goals. So that's what I would do. So how do you get the business knowledge? You could do what I did, which is get an MBA. And after an MBA, I also read at least 500 to 1,000 business books. And I also got executive training and executive coaches. You could do that. Or you could take a course like ours where we actually provide all of it in there because we want to make sure that you get to your goals. But business skills are important and they will do so much for you. They'll increase your salary. They'll increase your career and they'll give you more opportunities than you can imagine. Raman. Hi, Mike. You often talk about the CCIE, even though it's a configuration and troubleshooting heavy cert. You wonder why I never mentioned the CCDE. What stopped me from getting one in my opinion on it? So, Roman, that's a great question. So, when I look at a certification, there's a couple of things that I look for. I look for brand recognition, and I look at what the managers are going to know or think about it. So, when I did my CCIE, for the most part, they didn't have the CCDE. Or they were just thinking about development. My CCIE number is 7417. Now, I'm gonna give you some information, Roman, that honestly broke my heart. And I'm also going to give you the other side of it. But here's the information that really broke my heart. And here's why I never went down the CCDE path. The CCIE was my introduction to networking. From the time I said I wanted to work in networking till the time I passed my CCIE, it was 9 months. And that was the start of it for me. So for me, that was my intro to networking. Now, I excelled well because right after the CCIE, I realized how much I didn't know. Then I got real nervous and I locked myself in a room and I started reading a lot, probably 1,000 pages a day for the first year or two of my actual career because I knew how much I didn't know. And then it was about 2003, Roman. I passed the CCIE in, say, 2000. And about 2003, I was very fortunate. And I had a manager really do something for me, Roman. And what happened is my manager pulled me aside. We were all in the company, all their sales engineers were in a CISSP boot camp. And my manager says, Mike, can we talk? My manager pulled me out of the meeting. He gave me an extra bonus for closing some deal, which I was all excited about. And then he said, Mike, can we talk about your future? And I said, sure, Don, I'd be thrilled to talk about your future. And he said, Mike, he said, I know I'm making you do the CISSP. And he says, and I know you're one of the CCIEs. But he said, enough with the tech and stop wasting your time on tech certifications. And I said, huh? And he said, Mike, he said, the difference between you, and this was, I was earning about $150,000 a year at the time. We're going back 20 some years ago. And my manager said, Mike, the difference between you as a $150,000 solutions architect and a $300,000 enterprise architect is this. He said, stop focusing on the tech. He said, it's about the impact you can make to your clients. And he said, you're going to make a greater impact if you have a team of 50 people versus just you. He said, if you can guide the client into making the right decision because you can exercise influence, that's going to help you. If you can sell the client on doing what's right for them and closing a deal, that's right for you. And going to be better and more impactful for the client. And he said, if you can impact your client and boost their financial performance with your technology, not just make the tech work, now you're a $300,000 architect. And I heard that. And I said, can I go to business school? Can I go to executive classes? Can I do that? And I never thought another certification again. No, Roman, I'll tell you, several years later, I got promoted into a big executive architect role. And my manager, who was at Cisco, said, Mike, can we take that CCIE off of your business card? Can we remove that CISSP? Mike, I like the MS. Mike, I love the MBA, but get rid of all this other techie alphabet soup. And I was horrified. And I said, why? Why would I do this? And they said, do you want to be seen as an executive strategist or do you want to be seen as a techie? I can tell you, the executive strategist, I know where you're going. The techie said, I can send you back to the tech teams, but it's not going to be so good for your career. So there's that. So why do I typically like the CIE over the CCDE? Well, the following was this. One of the things that I like when I hire a CCIE, I don't even care that the CCIE at all. It's meaningless to me. What I like about the CCIE, or quite honestly, the CCDE, is it's so hard. 95% of the people are going to fail it. The person's going to have to spend $15,000 to $30,000 to even pass it. The person's going to have sleepless nights for a year. The person's going to have a headache every day for a year. Minimum, maybe 2 or 3 years for the CCIE, depending upon the person, or the CCDE. And anybody that's willing to work that hard, to fight that hard for their career, they make great employees. That's the employee that never quits. That is the employee that wants to be the best. That's the employee that's competing to be the best. And that's the person that won't quit until the job's done. So I love CCIs and CCDEs. I don't care about the certification itself, but I care about how hard it was to get through it. Hope that helps. By the way, he used to work as a waiter in a fine dining restaurant on board a private $130 million yacht for 6 years. Sounds fun. Took a gap year in 2023 to learn cloud, worked as a junior cloud engineer in 2024, and will start working as cloud security architect in March, although it's a relatively new role in the company. I'll do some engineering work, but still happy. So congratulations. That's wonderful. If you're doing engineering work, you won't get to do architecture. Because the second you actually get involved in physically doing it, you're not going to be able to focus on anything else. But you know what? This is more of that technical architect, that more engineering kind of role. And I think it's incredible because look at you and look what you've done and look what you've accomplished. So I think it's great. And the point is, one of the things that I've always loved about tech is all of us can come from anywhere and, literally speaking, do anything we want. I was a firefighter paramedic, then a nurse. Then I practiced internal medicine. Roman, you said it was good to listen to some more videos in 2023. Wonderful. Thank you. And appreciate what we do. I'm so happy you're here. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you. So take this job, do whatever they want you to do. Keep learning. And guess what? You may do a little hands-on now, but every project you're going to work on, Roman, here's what's so great about being an architect. We have to research for everything. You might be spending 2 hours a day doing research. So every little thing you do every day is another level of research. It's going to make you better. So this is one of these careers that actually experience makes you better, not because you've made mistakes and learned from your mistakes, but because you're learning new skills and new things and new knowledge every single day. You're making yourself a better consultant. Congratulations, Roman. I love hearing these stories. Welcome to our world. It is going to be the greatest. It'll be the best experience of your life. I promise you that. Once you go from anything into, even if it's 80% architecture, you'll love it. What accounts for the disparity in treatment and promotion process between the engineer and the architect? Well, Folashaki, let's talk about the difference between what an engineer does in their job and what the architect does in their job. And let's also talk about who notices. So here I am now in enterprise architect, cloud architect. I don't care. Now, today I met with the CEO. And I also met with the president of 5 different business units. I had discussions about the organization's growth, the organization's strategy, where each business unit is going, where the business unit's challenges are. After this, I helped map out the business architecture. I evaluated the business processes, and I may have even identified an inefficiency that could make that business better. I collected that information. I gathered it. I went back to key stakeholders. I found some inefficiencies in their business and asked them if they'd like help with it. They were grateful for the fact that we found opportunities. I then went to the organization and I then evaluated their technology strategy and saw a misalignment between the technology where they were using and that business's goals. I realigned that strategy and poof, all of a sudden that business is making 3% more money. 3% more money is $200 million a year net income, and they only paid me $500,000 a year to do it. They're going to love me. Now, by comparison, I've got the engineer doing very important things. The engineer is a very important person. They matter. But now I've got the engineer doing important things, working in an environment where nobody sees what they do. They're not talking to the executives on a normal basis. The executives don't know their name. And then generally speaking, when the engineers actually get seen or heard by their manager, they're not talking about things that management cares about. They're talking about tech. I wrote this code faster than you wrote this code. This firewall is faster than this firewall. AWS has this new feature. How's that compared to Amazon? And they're worried about the stuff that management doesn't even care about. Management doesn't care about any new things that AWS made or Azure made or Google made. Management cares what you can do to optimize their business, how you can make them more money. No. If you've got a cloud tool, a data center tool, a GPU, or quite frankly, if you had a big red balloon that that enhanced their profitability, they'd love you for it. So it's really about what the architect is doing versus the engineer, what the engineering is doing. The engineer is focused on the tech. The engineer is focused on the infrastructure. They're not seen by the business. And sadly, as good as our engineers are, they're considered to be an expense and they're considered to be the help. Now, by comparison, we've got the architect that's sitting at the C-suite, advising the C-suite and being seen as a peer at the C-suite. Now, that means the C-suite, which has all the money, is more inclined to give the promotions and the strategies, which is why it's not uncommon to see an enterprise architect become a chief information officer. And it's also not uncommon to see the best techies stuck in their tech jobs forever. Now, Folashaki, I can tell you this. I've worked with really good engineers, really good, skilled engineers. And when you take those engineers and you build their communication skills and you build their leadership skills and you build their executive presence and you build their sales skills and you focus on their emotional intelligence, now they move into a new kind of engineering role where they're typically called like a distinguished engineer. Now we're dealing with an engineer that's got technical expertise and business acumen, and all of a sudden their salary is double. And then they are no longer treated as the help. They are seen as a peer and a strategist along with the architect because they are solving business problems. So that's really what it is. I mean, a doctor is not more important than a nurse. They're equally important. When the patient comes into the hospital, the doctor writes orders or a plan, and then the nurse works 24 hours a day to carry out the plan by the physician. No nurse, no patients are going to get better. It doesn't matter how good the doctor's plans are on a piece of paper. They're equally important. It's just that unfortunately, nobody sees the nurse for as valuable as the physician that wrote that plan. But I promise you, the patient needs that nurse as much as they need that doctor if they're going to go home safely after being sick in the hospital. Hope that makes sense, Folashaki. Damon, what would be the best way to go about a cost-benefit analysis for a security architecture? So, Dingelman, this is one of those things I want you to come to class for. But the first thing we have to do is quantify an organization's risk. Because we have to know what we're protecting. So if we know what an organization's risks are, then we can quantify that risk, and then we know what we need to do to go mitigate that risk. Now, when we mitigate these risks, we're going to have a lot of options. Option one is a deterrent. A deterrent is a banner when you sign in that says, beware, these are systems. If you break into the systems, we'll prosecute you. That's supposed to scare honest people away. You may also see people have on their house, protected by big dog. No. That's a deterrent control we can do. And a deterrent control, for example, will have its strengths and its weaknesses. We can put in a preventative control, for example, to keep people from doing something. It could be a fence. It could be a gate. It could be a physical security guard. It could be, we could be for example, we can put in a control technology like a firewall that won't let people go. So that could be another option. Now, there are certain risks that we might just not be able to mitigate, or it may not be able to make sense to mitigate, that we may want to transfer. So realistically speaking, Dingelman, and come to class, when it comes to architecture, you're doing the same things that any strategy consultant would do. You'd create a SWOT analysis of all your options, map all your options out, quantify all options, and then figure out which is the best option after evaluating all trade-offs based upon your client's needs. But at a high level that I can give you, but come to class and we'll get much deeper. And I know you're one of our students. Okay, so I only have one more question, so we'll finish up after this question unless you have another question. If you have another question, I'll stick around a little longer because I really do want to help. What tool do I suggest for creating diagrams? Anything that's convenient for you. So, Prasad, most people think an architect's going to spend a lot of the time drawing pictures. We really don't. We spend a lot more time in Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint. So what could you use? I will tell you, for the most part, I create most documents in PowerPoint. And because I'm creating enterprise architectures, I use squares, little boxes, little circles, and other things that are very easy to use. Now, Prasad, I'll also tell you, when you get big in your architecture roles. For example, when I moved into an executive architect role at Cisco, where I was a chief architect for the entire vertical that I was in, the healthcare vertical. In this particular case, I would just use anything I wanted, or even write a piece of paper and take a picture of it or a scan of it. And then I would send it to the graphics team, and they would do it in what's called Adobe InDesign, and they would make it look pretty. Many architects use Microsoft Visio. Many architects use Lucidchart or Draw.io. It really doesn't matter what you're dealing with. It just needs to be simple and effective. But I use PowerPoint because, for the most part, most business things are really done in PowerPoint. A lot of things are done in Visio. But I don't always work with a Windows machine, so PowerPoint always worked well for me. But honestly, you can use anything you want. At the end of the day, a picture is part of it. But a picture is just a graphical representation of what we do. We need to understand the flow of the users, the workflows, the business architectures, the value streams that are going on, the flow of the applications, the flow of the data, all of this we need to be able to map out. So at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot of documents, a lot of drawings. What really matters when it comes to creating our architectural documents and our diagram, and if you, in the end of the day, you could call them all what they call architectural artifacts. But what really matters is that we're consistent, that we use a consistent naming convention and a consistent communication strategy and a communiques and a common lexicon or library of terms. Because we have to be very sure that everybody knows the terms and they don't confuse one thing with another. So those are some of the biggest things that I've actually seen all in all. Great question there, Prasad. Let's bring in the next one. Is ITIL useful for an architect? So are you talking about the framework or are you talking about the certification? So I'll tell you what any architectural framework is. I recommend TOGAF, and that's the one I would do. It's the one I teach, and I'll tell you why I teach it. So 80% of the world's largest organizations use TOGAF as their enterprise architecture framework. So I put myself there. We are a member of the Open Group along with companies like Amazon and all your big tech companies. They're all a member of the Open Group, which created the TOGAF framework. So I use the TOGAF framework. Any framework like an ITIL framework or a TOGAF framework, understand that it will teach you nothing of architecture. Nothing. Zero. All these frameworks are steps to success. So for example, it'll tell you in TOGAF, the first thing we have to look is the vision for the architecture. And then we have to evaluate the business architecture and tune the architecture. And then after that, we have to look at the data and the application architecture. And after that, we have to look at the technology architecture. And after that, so it's a step 1, 2, 3. Now, the thing with any of these architecture frameworks is it's not going to tell you how to do any of those things. It's not going to teach you how to find the business. It's not going to teach you how to map out the business architecture, even what a business architecture is. So are these frameworks useful? Yes, to a degree. Knowing a step-by-step way to do things every single time is really what matters. So I kind of hope that helps. But so it's not that it's going to hurt you. But Falashaki, if you want to become an architect, I'd recommend you learn how to become an architect and focus on the bigger things. The business acumen, the leadership, the executive presence, the sales, the critical communication screens, the network, the data center, the compute, the storage, security, load balancers, forward proxies, reverse proxies, those kind of things. How you would design your security, what goes into your security, what goes into your storage, what applications are going to use to drive transformation. How do you create transformation and not just migration? Those are the things that are useful for the architect. You're convinced with the security architect, that would be the one that I would recommend. You don't have any degree or experiences. What are your chances of being a security architect? Kamoy, what if I told you that the only people that ever have experience as a security architect are people that have actually worked as security architects, and we all get our first job? Engineering will provide no experience related to architecture because it's a completely different job. What if I give you some examples of people that never worked in tech that became architects as their first tech job? So we have Arun. Arun was a student of mine. He was working at Home Depot in a non-tech role, but he was hired by TELUS as a cloud architect. Yvonne Tamba, for example, a 24-year-old college student hired by AWS as an architect, solutions architect after we trained him. Now, Daniel Bosa Kamoy didn't graduate high school, did not have a GED either, got hired by JP Morgan Chase as a solutions architect after we trained them. Now, Coyote was hired by AWS after our training as a solutions architect, first tech job. Now, Lenny was our video editor, but he went from video editor to solutions architect at Arrow Electronics. Delroy Batt did have an associate degree, but his last job was an emergency medical technician, He left our program as a security architect for CDW. R was a TV host hired as a security architect. Jermaine was selling landscaping gear before he was hired at Southern New Hampshire University. Jennifer E. was a mental health tech before she was hired by JP Morgan Chase, of course, as an architect. Wallace Agana was a sales rep before he was hired by JP Morgan Chase as an enterprise architect. Al was hired by Deloitte as a senior solutions architect as his first job. If you get the right training and you put in your time and your effort, you're going to do great, Kamoy. And all of our programs, you stay in our programs until you're hired, or at least you have the opportunity, because we never take our online components away from you, because all we want to do is change your life and get you hired. So I'm pretty convinced you come, you join us as a security architect, you stay in the program, you do all the work, you're going to have a career that you absolutely love. So hopefully you can join us on the webinar and I'll hear about why I love this job. You'll hear why on average this job pays $229 a year, but on average the pay range is $200 to $300, and why there's so much more to go after that. And we'll talk about the massive shortages in cybersecurity people, like the 750,000 people that are short of jobs just in the US right now. And that's prior to that $500 billion investment on Stargate that's going to need a lot more networking, compute, storage, and security people. So you have no problem getting a security architect job. If you do the work, you should be highly successful. Join us in the free webinar. Chris, please drop a link to that free webinar. Okay, so I wanted to tell you about a couple of things that we absolutely have that I wanted to tell you about. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have a completely free webinar on how to become a security architect. And after that, I want to tell you that we have a free ebook or guide for most architecture careers, AI architect career, enterprise architect career, cloud architect career in the description of this video. And we have a brand new security architect program that's currently at 50% off because it's brand new and we're still doing this. And we're excited about the pre-launch that begins officially on Monday of the actual course. So there is that. So let me answer the last question that came in. And if any others come in, I'll come in for a short period of time. Shaki, how does the chief information officer differ than the chief technology officer? Well, generally speaking, the chief information officer is a more of an executive position. So both are considered officers or executive positions, but in many cases, the chief technology officer reports to the chief information officer. So the chief information officer is the head strategist, and the CTO is a slightly more technical version of the CIO. And if you ever looked at the way sometimes some organizations work, like if you were to deal with a company like Cisco or Amazon or IBM or Microsoft, you'll note that they bring two people to you when they sell something. They typically bring an account executive, which is a business executive, and they typically bring either a sales engineer or a solutions architect. That's going to be the technical person that's involved in sales. The chief information officer is a pure executive. Most of the world is going to be executive. Most of the world is going to be strategy, and most of it's going to be business. The chief technology officer is a more technical version. They're still an executive, but they're more technical. And in some cases, the chief technology officer is really the enterprise architect or the chief enterprise architect, where they still have a little more tech in them than the CIO. But they're still not a technical person or a technical person by comparison. They're more of a business executive that understands tech and understands it well. That's kind of the primary difference that we're talking about with the chief information officer, the chief technology officer. I've trained people like Naformi. His chief technology officer was his first tech job ever over there in England. And it is a wonderful, wonderful role. CIO, same thing. I used to lead a business council of CIOs when I was Cisco, where they used to come in once a year and they would give us feedback on information and products. So I'm very familiar with both of these roles so much. Love these questions you guys asked today. So thank you for coming and thank you for asking these questions. Looks like I heard one other question came in. So let me see if I can help that. Hi, Mike. Can creating content around security, such as blogs and newsletters, help you handle a role as a cloud security architect? You haven't worked in tech. So the answer is yes, depending upon how you create them. So 90% of the posts people make in LinkedIn convince me not to hire them. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The post of I've been on 50 interviews and no one is willing to hire me tells employers to stay away. And what I mean by this is employers know that if somebody tells employers to stay away because the person keeps failing 50 interviews, they don't want to waste their time to fail 51. Now, if you create content that I shows you as a strategist. So what are the emerging threats that are there and what can you do to go mitigate them? That shows me you're an architect, and I can't find good architects. I can't find them. So kind of think about that in the back of your mind. If you created content, and I don't even care if you wrote a little article to just show the difference between TLS security and IPsec security, and you talked about the strengths and weaknesses of each approach and which should you use for remote access technology, again, that would be something architecture oriented. Architecture oriented would be for a high stakes app, how many levels of firewalls are sufficient and what should that demilitarized zone look like? Another document or blog could be on some form of a risk mitigation strategy. When is it best to transfer the risk versus mitigate the risk? So if you're doing things that are showing that, if you're out there creating architectures on how to use secure a multi-cloud architecture, now you're going to be really great. So these are kind of the things that we're really talking about. And yes, these will help you land a blog. Alex, why don't you join us on the webinar tomorrow, the Security Architect webinar? And when I really go over the role and talk about some depth about what we do and why we do it and how we do it, I think it'll help you understand the kind of things that you need to talk about because it's there. But if you've not been trained as a cloud security architect in the past or worked as a security architect, you might need training, especially if you're an engineer, because it's going to be a very different role for the engineer versus the architect. I just don't know your background. Join me tomorrow, and if you want, I can assess your readiness. And if you come on the webinar, I can ask you 2 or 3 tech questions, and I can see right now, are you ready to be hired? And if so, I'll tell you. And I've done it before. Yes, this person's ready. And if not, I'll tell you where you need to begin. Love to help you. Does knowing machine learning help you in becoming a cloud architect? It depends what you mean. So Simon, if you have an AWS machine learning certification, that teaches you nothing and helps you nothing on the way to be a cloud architect. Now, if you understand what are the principles, if you understand how to design machine learning environments, if you understand how to architect artificial intelligence in machine learning environments, if you know the business applications that you could use machine learning on, and you know how you can optimize business with machine learning, now there you're at. Now, then, if you can think of how you could use that knowledge of machine learning, where is your sources of data from machine learning? What kind of data hygiene and manipulation and data practices you need to have to be able to get that AI machine learning application that you needed to have? Did you need to train any models or anything that could be related? What kind of compute were you using? Was it done on the CPU? Was it done on the GPU? Was it done on the TPU? What were the architectural decisions that made you choose where to run that compute? Now, Simon, that's going to help you be an architect. So it all depends on what you're doing. That hands-on stuff, being able to configure, that's going to teach you nothing to be an architect. No, knowing how to create it and create the architectures behind these AI and machine learnings, and knowing what steps to need to take to make sure that these things work and they're accurate, now that is a skill that'll help you become an architect. So you all have to think about it. Does it help you understand, design, or improve the business? And if it does, it's going to help you. If it's related to your ability to build it, it's not going to be helpful. And this is where people go wrong. People don't understand the difference between knowing how to configure something and knowing how something works. Simon, it's real different. Simon, did you use your computer today? So what I mean by the knowledge of how your computer works, let's say on the computer you have today, do you understand how the power comes into your computer and how the power is connected to your motherboard, how the power is stepped down? Now, could you tell me how power gets to the processor? Now, while we're at it on your PC, could you tell me about the processor, the architecture of the processor, how many cores are on that processor, the frequency of the cores, the level 1, level 2, level 3 cache, and the implications of this? Now, could you tell me the number of PCI lanes and how that determines how many GPUs you can put it in a machine learning environment? Could you tell me about the SATA, the SAS, or the NVMe interfaces on your computer and where their performance limitations are and how we could optimize the performance of that? That's the knowledge that I would need to do if I was designing a system. Now, whether you can install Linux on that system, whether you can install Windows on that system, whether you can run Google Chrome, I don't care if I need to design a system. I need you to know what goes into it. So if I was going to spec a compute for a large cloud or data center environment, I need to know what my applications are like. Are they single-threaded or are they multi-threaded? And if they're single-threaded, they're going to need a CPU with a higher frequency, for example. If they're multi-threaded, I can use a higher core count, and it's not so frequency dependent. Now, of the applications themselves, are they processor intensive? Are they DRAM intensive? Where's going to be the weakness in that? The application, where should we host it? Why should we host it? How do we secure it? These are more the architectural decision-making things, Simon. So the question is not, will machine learning help you? It all depends. If it's the engineering, nope, not going to help you. If it's the understanding of how you design the systems, the elements of the systems, which parts of the systems need to be there, how you can optimize each parts of the system, how you can optimize the accuracy, how you can optimize and improve the inferences that you would be getting from machine learning, now that's going to help you with architecture, because that's the architect's job. Kind of hope that makes it simple for you. Pablo Messer. Mike, you're working on a multi-cloud project that involves 3 clouds, and the objective is to federate all 3 clouds from a central system. How would I approach these challenges? Well, Actually, you mentioned 2 challenges, and I'm not sure which one you mean. So this is obviously not something for a YouTube video. This is the kind of thing that I typically spend about 1,000 hours with my students to teach them, because this is what it takes. But if you've got multiple clouds, you could be talking about the IAM system potentially, or you could be talking about just getting these things together. So I'm assuming you're not talking about IAM systems. Generally speaking, what needs to be planned is the IP addressing scheme needs to be planned well architected ahead of time, so that there can be route summarization or aggregation across the clouds. There typically needs to be multiple links per cloud providers. You typically want to firewall off each cloud provider from the other. You typically want to limit what routing can be sent so you can control your traffic. You typically don't want to use any proprietary services. And you typically need to make sure that your WAN and other things can have no single points of failure. But without knowing it, I don't know how many people we're serving. I don't know the goals of it. I don't know where all the applications are. I don't know what's talking to what. And that kind of thing, Pablo, is typically going to take an architect, a team, 3 to 6 months to even go figure it out, to be even able to figure out how to approach these challenges. So what I can tell you this, what I always do is I figure out what the business goals are, and then I figure out what I'm working with. And then when I figure out what I'm working with, because you may find that all these clouds are using proprietary stuff, like a DynamoDB or an SQS or an ECS, and that's going to be a nightmare to try to undo that and put into a more standard system. You could be using standard systems that are easier. You could be using databases that write to all nodes like Apache Cassandra. Boom, stick them in 3 clouds and they're just synchronized. No big deal. You could be dealing with other ones that are proprietary and not. So there's a lot of things that are going to go into this that we can't address in a meeting. But if it was an architecture class, we could address it. But it would take a couple of classes to really dive deep into it. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm still thrilled that you are here. So hope to see all of you on the webinar tomorrow. I know I love going to these webinars and I love meeting people, and it's on Zoom. Hope to see some of you there. And remember, it's completely free tomorrow. Please join me on the webinar. Please download the book. And because we just launched our Security Architect program, it's temporarily 50% off. So if you're interested, take advantage of it while that lasts. Take care.